Now think about being 13 years of age. Her crown, meant for children that should be learning to read, play and dream like other kids her age, was too big for head. They gave her power instead of dolls, instead of the years of her life written in childhood. Then, they provided a husband for her instead of security, a soldier who saw in her not a young teenager, but an instrument. Before the year was out, the world would whisper about what could not be true across a land and giver of life. The child queen had quickened. Huda's story is that of power, treachery, and such a tragic end, it would become the most haunting chapter in Indian history. Before we get started on this tragic true tale, be sure to subscribe to our lore profile for more unsung pasts and sorrowful destinies. If you think forgotten voices deserve to be heard, do hit the like button, and stick around at the end because the last days of this child queen has a terrifying message about power, innocence, and at what cost one comes to be born royal. She was not born from comfort, but as a royal pawn. Palace whispers whispered the name of the land from which she was born, since her first breath across kingdoms. The prophecy was plain to see: this babe would be queen, but life, good old life, is not that fair, especially for a child. By the time she was 10, they had turned her into a woman, the gowns too heavy for her bony frame and teetering before the nobles. Diplomats groveled, poets extolled her beauty, and priests called her the anointed one of God. But underneath the silk and gold drapings, she was nothing more than another scared little girl who wanted to prance barefoot through the palace gardens. But the crown does not wait. At just 12 years old, her destiny had already been decided by powerful men. Her marriage would not be about love or even friendship. Her marriage would be about alliance. She would not own her body. Maybe the kingdom would become it. Marriages were weapons in medieval Europe. Daughters were their treaties alive for kings. Our little queen was no different. 12, and he had promised her to a man who was almost thrice her age, especially a duke with armies feared beyond borders. She dressed in white and gold on the day of the wedding. A thick veil obscured her face. When the church bells rang, no one questioned whether she was familiar with the words of the marriage vows. She knew scarcely the meaning of marriage, let alone the responsibilities of a wife. This was the night that Child Queen learned her life did not belong to her anymore. Childhood laughter had passed. Duty's silence had started. A year later, murmurs raced through the court. The queen, not yet of the age of a teenager, was with child, and on the other hand servants swished glances, some with pity while others curiosity. The nobles put on a brave face, of course, but the parters behind doors were beside themselves with shock, which stopped cold in a 13-year-old body not yet built for motherhood. Medical professionals sounded the alarm, but their warnings were ignored. Esteemed lineage mattered more than a girl's life. Her pregnancy was painful. She became unwell, fatally so, and was hauled out in public by the court, the size of her sickly belly proof of her obligations. Considered as the epitome of fertility and might, though in reality she was just shattering inside. The day of labor, much as we had wished it away, came around far too quickly. Her screams echoed through the stone corridors of the palace for hours. Back outside, the prince pumps up the chatter amongst the queues. The child queen fought her way out from within. By the time baby arrived, it was just hanging on, barely breathing, or some versions of the story have the baby dying after a couple of days. Some whisper the child lived, but was whipped away to be raised by prudish nurses and never allowed to utter mama in the hearing of the queen. Although she was a child, the world treated her like a pawn. If you think every child is entitled to be free, pass along her story. The world needs to know. Silence is not an option. It was not some grand or noble imprisonment of the child queen. It was brutal. They locked behind the walls in a damp tower, though whose cold forehead flowing water drops to the ground lightly, where there is no light from small windows. She slept on straw. Rats scurried across the floor. Guards taunted her. Oh, it's the forgotten queen. She was only 15, but to her enemies she was still a threat. Hell, a royal-blooded girl might elicit loyalty still. Even a child with a crown would be able to imperil men who were powerful. What of her child? It's the most vicious of mysteries. Some records describe the baby as having died days after he was born. Whispered others say the child lived, but was spirited away and raised by strangers. to keep us all from considering with disgust the fact of a 13-year-old mother. The Queen would repeatedly inquire after her child. No one answered. The only thing that could break her heart, more than the chains on her wrists, is the silence. Even in captivity she remained a symbol, and from merely existing she could be a weapon of rebellion. And hushed whispers travelled just south by word of mouth. The Queen indeed still lives. Rebellions started and ended in her honour. There were peasants who carved her initials into the walls. Nobles passed secret letters. Her enemies panicked. They began to be more scared of her surviving than of her dying. That night, wine was served with her dinner. Some claim it was poisoned. Some more say it would not drink. Betrayer sensed. The truth was never proven. But just weeks later, her health took a turn for the worse. Her body seemed as ancient as her only 16 years. Fever burned her skin. Her bones ached. She was given bitter herbs, but none were effective. Her enemies' wishes were coming true, illness or poison. The guards opened her cell one cold winter morning and found she was dead. She looked so white and dead, with her hands folded as in prayer. She died without fanfare. No bells were rung. No processions marched. The kingdom that had crowned her once now entombed her in obscurity, as if too ashamed to remember what they did. Her husband wed again and had brand new offspring. She was wiped from the records by nobles who pretended that she had never been queen. But whispers you can't remove. All across the villages, candles burned for her. Some called her a martyr. Others called her a warning. If her child did live, its fate has always been among history's bitterest unknowns. Legend has it that the child then grew up without knowing about what his mother had gone through. Still others propose that the baby was dispatched so quietly to complete the final picture of wiping out the bloodline of the child queen. Her life laid bare the brutal realities of sovereignty. She was a little girl. She wanted to play, not rule. A love girl was she, not politics. Her body was reclaimed. Her childhood was robbed of her name, entombed. In light of her story, Jenny learned we must ask this tragic question: how many others were not as fortunate? Just how many young girls have given up their lives, nameless in history, for crowns and treaties and alliances? By today, she is perhaps name not written in big monuments of kings, but her tragedy still speaks. She reminds us that under a golden throne there may be a child who is quietly hurting. She is not remembered for the empire that she gained. She is remembered for what she lost. Her crown was not a blessing. It was a curse. Aching pain pulls behind a royal crown and golden halls. Her tragedy was not fiction, but actual real life. Don't look away now. Just keep watching, because her darkest chapter is still ahead. In the aftermath of her death, royal scribes attempted to wipe her from the chronicles. Her reign was excluded or reduced in official documents. Her portraits were hidden. Her name was rarely spoken. But the past is not so easily subordinated. In the streets and villages they spoke softly of the young queen and all her trials. To the common folk, she was no symbol of power, but of innocence shattered. The most mysterious, her child. If the baby were to die, history would be certain. But some others, written many decades later, insisted that the child had lived, spirited away in secret to be raised by loyal servants who wanted to protect the bloodline. Rumors circulated about a sharp-eyed boy concealed in monasteries or foreign courts. It was rumored that he would return years later to take back his mother's throne, but he was snuffed out. Others said he had become as a nameless man, royal blood unrecognized. This mystery helped ensure that her memory would not die, and that her story would become legend. Peasants swore that they had seen her ghost haunting the palace gardens, a swaddled child in her arms. Soldiers reportedly heard a young girl crying in the night within in the tower, in which she was allegedly kept prisoner. Her spirit entered legend. In some villages, mothers would caution their daughters, "Do not envy the crown, for the child queen still weeps for it." Her story was told for centuries in the history books as tragedy and as warning that the cost of ambition is innocence lost. Ironically, the same nobles who had scoured her from existence later manipulated her death for their own ends. Her name was invoked by rival factions as they claimed loyalty to the true queen's bloodline. Rebels held aloft banners with her initials on them. Pretenders to the throne alleged to be her secret offspring. Even in her death, she was co-opted by others. Her voice still silenced, her story still shaped by forces outside her control. If history was any guide, she could expect to have her story revisited by historians centuries hence. Some portrayed her as a victim, press-ganged into marriage and motherhood. Others said she was used as a political pawn against her will. But there was one fact all agreed on. She was too young. A crown was set upon a child's head, and the weight of a kingdom flattened her. Her life served as a cautionary tale about the perils of child marriage, dynastic politics, and the victimization of young girls through the ages. The Child Queen's fate is a chilling reminder about history. The throne does not care about age, innocence, pain. To rulers, children were not children. They were heirs, pawns, symbols of power. She was considered not a human, but an object. And in that objectification, she lost it all. Her childhood, her motherhood, and her life. In the world we now inhabit, her story is remembered not as royal drama, but as a human tragedy. Her life is invoked by advocates against child marriage, as a reminder that countless young girls have been destroyed by the practice over time. Her story is still being told by writers, filmmakers, and historians, sometimes as truth, sometimes as folklore. Some surviving portraits exist in museums. A young girl with solemn eyes, bearing the weight of a crown too heavy even for a grown woman. Each was a scarecrow solider who can trace her roots to the vicious struggle between Catholic Spain and Protestant England, and who used all the terrifying tools that shiftless siblings had accumulated since the 15th century to make life a horror for the other. Her story has turned into metaphor, a crown not of gold, but of thorns. We should learn from her that power without mercy will destroy not only those who lead, but those who follow. She was known as a queen, but in fact she was a child. She was lauded as a mother, but she was 13. As a bride she was fated, but she had been a prisoner in a wedding gown. And while centuries have passed, her voice still whispers across time, asking us to remember the price of silence. She was robbed every day of her life by kings, by priests, by power. But you can also give something. Your voice, comment, share, speak her name, so history never buries her again. While rulers sought to erase her, ordinary people preserved her in song and ballad. Minstrelsy on the road sang of the girl queen who wept in her crown. Mothers muttered lullabies of her sorrow. These songs tended to contort fact into myth, but they had at their heart the story of a young girl robbed of her childhood by politics and power. Through villages, her story was transmitted like a cautionary tale. Her story was rediscovered by poets and writers centuries later. She surfaced in plays and novels and poems, sometimes as a saintly martyr, sometimes as a ghost, haunting wicked kings. As historians pointed out, her tragedy served as the inspiration for fictional characters all over Europe. Tragic queens, innocent brides, young heroines caught in webs of power. Even Shakespearean heroines such as Ophelia bore echoes of the child queen's heartache. Her name came up over and over as a symbol of injustice. In revolutions, there were rebels who measured themselves against the silent queen. In political disputes, she would be cited as a symbol of how monarchy could oppress the powerless. Leaders feared her well into centuries after her death. They knew that a ghost could be more perilous than a rival who was still alive. In modern times, academics and activists started to reframe her story in a new light. She wasn't just a tragic queen any longer. She was instead a trigger for stolen girlhood, a case study in the history of child marriage and exploitation. As royal history, yes, but also as human history. She is known not by her robes, but by her struggles, and by the names of innumerable other girls never recorded. And her tragedy reverberates with chilling relevance. Even now, in some places, children are married against their will, their fate decided by politics, family honor, or poverty. The child queen's destiny isn't just medieval, it's modern. To remember that when you treat children as tools, humanity too is lost. She and the film remind us that when we do not listen, history has a frightening way of repeating itself. She was different from the rest of them. She left no great monuments, no huge armies, no empire. but her story has endured many of them. She survives not as a monarch, but as an emblem. She is frozen in time, perpetually 13, perpetually a child, always with a crown too heavy. In every retelling, she is still what history would not permit, human. Her name may be scratched from royal scrolls, but her ghost remains alive in human memory. And she is the queen who became a captive, the mother who never really got to hold her child, the girl who never grew old. Her tale forces us to face some grim facts, that power without pity severs, crowns without morals slay, and lost innocence can never be found. She was a voice crying in the wilderness. But now you can be the echo she never had. Don't just watch, respond, share, and use your voice, because her story is ours now. For centuries after her death, historians were still debating her life. Others said she was simply a pawn in political games, a casualty at the hands of powerful men. Various others hinted that she may have had her own aspirations, her own wishes to wield power, stifled by the narrative of victimhood. But whichever way you looked at it, there was one simple truth. She was barely 13, and already the weight of an empire sat on her shoulders. What killed her is one of history's mysteries. Records suggest fever, but the prevailing rumors were of poison. Some said her enemies poisoned her food to be sure she would not come back as a symbol of rebellion. Still others thought her body had just failed, worn away by pregnancy, grief, imprisonment. Either way, she was taken too soon. A question mark hangs over her child. A few contemporary scholars assert that document scraps indicate the newborn was alive for a few years. Others dismiss it as myth. The ones who did survive would be carrying the most dangerous bloodline in Europe. If not, she experienced the closing of her suffering in silence. One way or another, her motherhood is single-handedly the most haunting aspect of her story. A child who was made to bear a child. With time, her account grew more myth than reality. Plays, poems, and folklore portrayed her as a saint, a ghost, a warning. Actually, some of the facts are murky. But maybe that's the point. Her story was never hers to tell. Others always spoke for her. Kings, nobles, priests, and even historians chose how to remember her. Today, she is not remembered as a single queen in a single kingdom. She stands for every girl who was robbed of a childhood, every child bride silenced, every voice taken by power. She has been made universal, the face of all lost innocence in history. So why does her story matter today? Because the injustice she endured is alive and well. Millions of children are married under the age of 18 every year, despite it being illegal in many countries, and demonstrably harmful, with their voices silenced under the pressures of tradition, politics, or family survival. Her tale is both not just history, it is a warning, it is reflection, and it is a call to change. But in her death young, and in her odd immortality, her legacy lives on. She never got old, never turned mean or cruel, never lost her sense of innocence in the eyes of history. She will be forever fixed in history, a child queen, impregnated at 13, dead at 16, and for that, she will be remembered forever. This is her life, but this is not the end of the story of her life. Carry her memory forward, subscribe to share and keep her voice alive. If we forget, history repeats. Today, teachers are reading her story in human rights classrooms, not just history classrooms. Teachers turn her fate into a conversation starter about child marriage, women's rights, and the price of untrammeled power. Students examine her portrait and learn the truth. She was their age. She ought to have been playing, learning, laughing, not ruling, not bearing children, not dying in chains. Artists over the centuries have depicted her different lives. A child with a crown too large, a nursing mother holding an infant in shadow, a pale ghost at a castle window. Her story has been turned into dramatic films by modern-day filmmakers, causing viewers to weep at the brutal, senseless wrong committed against her. Ballads of her sadness are composed by musicians. Poets call her the queen who did not grow old. Her spirit lives on through art. While her story may have started in a particular kingdom, it has become a global one. Across Europe, Asia, and beyond, she is remembered as a chilling icon of the dangers of power and the exploitation of children. Every culture has its own child queen, whether for real or symbolic. She has transformed into a universal icon, a symbol that stolen innocence is a tragedy that affects all of humankind. Human rights defenders often cite her memory in the campaign against forced child marriages. Her story makes the statistics real, a face, a voice, a life shattered. In remembering her, they remind the world that behind every policy, behind every law, there are children whose destiny is determined by action. The most haunting aspect of her story might be the what if. What if she had been allowed to get bigger? What if she'd kept her baby, didn't have her baby? Who would she have been as a ruler, not as a captive? History gives no answers. But those lingering questions are what keep her story alive, reminding us of potential lost, dreams unfinished. What she has bequeathed is not gold, not monuments, not kingdoms. It is memory. A reminder that crowns can be cages, titles can char, and lower-ranking royals in a family so perverse can be eternally archetypes of the callous necessity of the social order they inhabit. Her memory will live on forever when she was 13, forever a queen, forever a child. The Girl Queen gives us one more lesson. That silence is the greatest foe of justice. She could not speak. Kings silenced her, priests silenced her, historians silenced her. But today we speak for her. And by speaking, we turn her from victim to legacy, tragedy to warning, silence to voice.